Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Zach from the ZAP podcast. I have always wanted to start a podcast, but I never knew where to start or where to even begin. And then I stumbled across the Anchor app. I love the Anchor app because it's completely free and it has all the editing and uploading capabilities that you need right from your phone. So it's super easy and super user friendly. If you've always wanted to start a podcast, go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, let's get on to the episode. All right, what's up, everyone? It's Zach, and today I'm here with a very special guest. I am here with John McGraw. John, how are you today?
Doing great, thanks, Zach. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you're able to be a part of this. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. For those of you that are listening back home, John is, first of all, he's a fellow podcaster, which I think is really cool. It's always cool to find someone else in the podcasting community. But he's also an intercultural trainer and a certified business coach. So that's a little bit of John kind of on a more surface level. But John, do you mind sharing more in depth about who you are, your background, what you're doing, all that good stuff?
Sure, no problem. So, the way I like to introduce myself is that I help expats and newcomers feel confident in their new country in less time and pain. Because
Mm,
sometimes when you introduce yourself as an intercultural coach or intercultural trainer, people aren't exactly sure what that means. And I figure that's a good way to start off. So I'm originally from, I'm from Canada, born and raised here. I spent much of my time prior to becoming an intercultural coach and as a as an an ESL instructor.
okay.
So English as a second language. I started out. In fact, I spent several years in Japan doing that. Transferred over to there. Continued doing that here for 8 years in Toronto, based in Toronto, and then it was a more recent transition into becoming a business coach and an intercultural coach for me because I felt I was particularly interested in working with newcomers to Canada because I've had many students who had come here obviously to learn English,
Mm-hmm.
and as you know, of course, having language skills is a very important skill in international business. So there were many students who wanted to work in international business, or perhaps in many cases settle in Canada.
Yeah.
And I found after a while that many students, even those who had excellent command of English, would still run into difficulties in communicating with people and getting settled into Canada. And many times they would think that it was due to something still with their English, that, oh well, my
Mm,
pronunciation is, I want to sound more Canadian or something like that. And I gave it some thought, and I think what it really came down to is that language skills are essential, but it's not the only thing that's important for adapting to a new country, living in, settling into a new, a new way of living. And because there are different ways of interacting with people,
right.
of being accepted in a community. And I'd had some experience with that after living in Japan for several years, which was my first time living outside of Canada in a country that not only, of course, has a different language, but in many ways, while there are similarities, there are some pretty significant differences on the ways that we use nonverbal communication, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or in terms of what we see as proper behavior, what's acceptable behavior, what some of the values are.
Right.
And I think that giving that kind of understanding to people about what some of the maybe expectations, for example, in business are in Canada, can really help people to advance more quickly when they're coming from another culture where some of the norms are different. And there are some unique aspects of Canadian business culture that can be a little challenging when you're not
Okay.
used to them. So uh, that's my interest, and that's mainly what I do, working with newcomers, and I have an interest in working with entrepreneurs who are new to Canada, because Canada, as you know, aside from the First Nations, is a nation of immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
and we thrive on having new perspectives and people who come from different backgrounds and easing their way into uh, adapting here, not changing to become completely Canadian, whatever that means,
Right.
but to just be aware of what some of the expectations are so that people can adapt in different ways. So
Mm.
that's maybe a bit more than a nutshell, but I get a bit
No, that
excited
was
about these things.
yeah, that was really good to hear, and I think it's really fascinating how you mentioned your experience and your time in Japan and teaching ESL, and then how it's kind of transformed into what it is now. And John, something I'm curious on. So you're helping folks who are coming to Canada, kind of just like get acclimated and everything. Now, does it when it comes to you working with these individuals, does it depend on what culture they're coming from, like how you work with them, or is it kind of like a one size fits all, kind of introducing them into the way and the culture of Canada?
That's a really good question, Zach. I would say there are some things which can apply to everyone, but
Mm-hmm.
it does depend on, to a certain extent, what culture they're from and also the individual as well,
Sure.
because it's not, when we think about culture, it's not just national culture, although that's the most common thing. It could be based on the profession they're in, the industry they've come from, the background, the generational culture as well. There's
Yeah.
so many subcultures. There's so many different factors that come into play. I mean, even if we just think about uh, Canadians who maybe come from a similar cultural background, ethnic background, maybe second or third generation Canadians, for example, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
they grew up with families from the same background, maybe several generations in Canada. But if they're from a different generation or even from a different part of Canada, there could be significant differences there
Right.
too. So there's a lot of adjustment. And when it comes to the coaching aspect of it, a lot of that is working with what the person is bringing with them. And I basically I operate on the idea that, well, of course, you can find many different sources about tips about, okay, how to
Mm-hmm.
get along better in a culture. We can find, and many times that's what many people think. Oh, that's what I need is a list of bullet points about what to do and what not to do in
Right.
different situations, and that can be helpful in the short term. If maybe you're going on a business trip for a week or a couple of weeks, but if you're planning to build a life somewhere, such as many of the newcomers here to Canada, they're not coming here just for a short stay.
Right.
Um, if they're expats who are sent on assignment, they're here for a few years. But in many cases, if they're newcomers, they're planning to set a new life here.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, a deeper understanding of what exactly culture is important. And that includes not only understanding what, say, Canadian culture is, but understanding your own culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't really know that about their own cultures because, particularly if they've never been outside
Mm-hmm.
of their own country or their own groups, they may not understand what culture means. Think many times you ask someone, okay, well, what's culture? Well, I think about, okay, well, it talks about the food or
Mm-hmm.
arts or things like that. But really, what culture is it's the way we do things around here, and that includes the values that we have and some of the underlying assumptions and beliefs on what's the proper way to do things.
Yeah.
And until you give some thought to that, there's a tendency to just assume that these ideas are universal,
Right.
right? Um, Proper eye contact, for example. Eye contact means that in Canadian culture, that's a sign of respect, but in other cultures, that can be a sign of aggression,
Right.
and be quite rude. Uh, if you don't understand something, when you're being given instructions, right? In Canadian
Mm-hmm.
culture, the assumption is, okay, well, if you don't understand, then you should ask questions to clarify. And I'm bringing this up because I have a number of personal experiences with that when I was teaching in Japan. One story that I often tell in particular was when I was working with a student, and this was shortly after I started teaching in
Okay.
Japan, and I had a number of students in the classroom, and I was leading them through some instructions on preparing for an English exam, and gave them some instructions. Okay, you're doing multiple choice, so if you don't know the answer, just always circle C, because at least you're choosing something. Those
Right.
kinds of basic tips.
Yep.
And then I asked them, do you understand? And the answer was yes. And so I thought,
Okay.
okay, they understand. Go ahead. And then as the time went on, it became quite clear that they did not understand what I was asking of them, because they were not
Hmm.
doing any of the instructions, and this frustrated me, and I had some discussions. Well, okay, well, why is it, okay, if you understood, why did you say that you did that?
Hmm.
And it came to the understanding, at least in Japanese culture, that it's better, and it's better to go along even if you don't understand, because otherwise that can cause frustration for the teacher, because they have to go through the trouble of explaining things
Uh,
again.
okay.
Right. And this was something which was just, to me, bizarre at the time,
Right.
because of course, brought up to, well, if you, we want you to understand and do the things correctly. So it's better to ask those questions and to get it right.
Right.
But that was just a different way. And a lot of that is ingrained. If you just take it in isolation, that seems like, okay, well, that's really weird. But if you
Right.
take it in the context of, all right, there's a lot of other things that are involved, such as um, Japanese, one major difference between, say, Japanese culture and Canadian culture is that Canada, similarly to the US and some of the newer countries, as I mentioned earlier, we're made up, we're nations of immigrants, right?
Right.
Who have
Right.
come from so many different backgrounds. Japan, for the most part, um, while there are smaller subcultures and subgroups of ethnic groups, it's largely, not entirely, but largely homogeneous.
Okay.
And they've had this culture on this island for thousands of years.
Right.
So there's a lot of implicit ideas where things don't really need to be
Yeah.
said. It's just understood. Here, Canada, we've got so many people from so many different cultures and backgrounds, right? Who came from so many different ways of communicating things, that it came to the idea that, okay, if we want to make sure that we understand, we got to explicit out. We've got to write things in contracts. When it comes to business deals, we've got to explicitly, when we have a meeting, and follow up on that. We've got to
Right.
send an email to say, hey, this is what we understood, okay, so that we're all have the same understanding on the same page, which is not really that necessary in a place like Japan. So if I were Japanese, they could say yes, but if I was paying more attention, for example, to the student's body language at the
Right.
time, that showed that they were not understanding, maybe a bit of a deer in the headlights look, or
Yeah.
things like that, then I could more gracefully maybe explain it in a different way, or ask, could you explain to me what it is that you would, what I'm asking you to do?
Right.
Um, so that was a learning point for
Hmm.
me. One of many, of
Right.
course. But that's just another example of understanding. Okay, well, we value explicit communication, and there are historical reasons for that. It's not just
Hmm.
something that just happened out of vacuum. They're quite open, because of wanting to, in Japan, to keep that sense of harmony. You may not necessarily want to be too direct about things, because that can be offensive and it hurts people's feelings. And there's reasons. There are
Yeah.
reasons for all of those, and I think that's when it comes to deeply understanding your culture and how it affects your own thinking, then you can more easily understand other cultures and adapt to them as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic point. I think that, like you said, I think a lot of times in many aspects of our life, we can get kind of on this autopilot where we don't really think about what we're doing or why we're doing the things that we do, or our surrounding or our environment that we're in. So I think kind of looking internally and having that kind of like awareness to reflect and understand your own culture, that's only going to help you understand and communicate with other cultures as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll have a better understanding of who you are,
Yeah,
and can benefit you in many ways, that inner awareness,
right.
and be able to empathize
Yeah,
more effectively with other people, who come from other backgrounds as well, rather than just going with an assumption and, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this way? What's
right.
wrong with them? Right?
Yeah,
It's Life just becomes better, richer, and you can understand it's not necessarily that my way is better, or even that their way is better. It's
yeah,
just that they're different.
yes,
And if you can shift and adjust to different expectations in different situations, or find a way to blend it together, um,
exactly.
that's then you have a lot of options,
Yeah,
and you become much more effective in business situations and in personal situations as well. And that's really what I really like to emphasize to
yeah,
people.
I think that's fantastic, and I think about just, like, in my personal and professional life too, when I talk to other folks, I always, like, kind of bring up the idea of, when you're learning from someone, maybe you have a mentor, maybe you have, a partner, like a professional, business partner or something, or a teacher, professor, whatever. When you're learning from someone, you don't have to, and you probably shouldn't just take everything they say and, like, emulate it and, "Okay, this is the best way to do it. That's how I'm gonna do it." But to just, like, learn and adapt and, take what your kind of own, understanding or preferences or skills or perspective is, and then kind of like tweak it based on what you're learning in your surroundings. So I think that's exactly kind of what you're saying of like, there's not necessarily like your way's better, their way's better. They're just different ways of doing things and both work completely fine. So it's like, like kind of tailoring your own style and preferences around kind of the other information that you're taking in.
Exactly, exactly. And I like what you mentioned about mentors, working with a mentor.
Hmm.
As you said, because of course, and just again highlighting, as you might be familiar with, that difference between mentoring and coaching, because
Yes.
that's another point that can be sometimes confusing for
Right.
people. There's a lot of mix up, as I'm sure you're aware, that mentoring is giving um, that advice based on that person's past experience. Okay, I've
Hmm.
done this, and this is what's worked for me, and that can be extremely valuable, of course.
Right.
And then, whereas a coach, the approach is more to ask questions, and provide, can provide advice when asked for, but largely to guide, help the person reach their own answers, what's going to
Yeah.
work best for them. And that's, again, I employ that coaching approach into my instruction, into my way of helping my clients. And it's a bit of a mixture of all of those things, but really, ultimately, the person can, once they have that information, they can decide
Yeah.
what is going to work best for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's at the end of the day, I think everyone kinda knows the direction they need to go in or knows kind of like where they wanna end up, but it's a matter of how to get there. And I think, like you said, that's kind of the job of a coach, not to say you need to do this, but for you to help the individual discover that they've known all along how to where they need to go. They just needed kind of that assistance to figure out the right path to get to that destination.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And this is why I also employ a couple of different assessments to help raise that awareness.
Mhm.
When it comes to, for example, I use something called the Intercultural Development Inventory,
Okay.
which is known as the IDI. And it's a measure of a person's ability to adapt to different cultures. So
Okay.
it's not culture specific. It's not about specifically adapting to Canadian culture or from a North American perspective. It's
Right.
something that's can be used for anyone in any culture, and it essentially measures your openness
Okay.
and the awareness of other cultures, and ability to adjust to different situations. And it's it's a valuable starting point. It's used by many organizations. It's used by many universities around the world. It's used by many governments, including the Canadian government, to measure that ability. And it's an opportunity to raise awareness, because in many cases, just like a lot of things, by human nature, we have a tendency to overestimate our ability.
Right.
right? We think we're, as I've heard it described, we consider ourselves to be better dancers,
Mm-hmm.
better drivers, and we also can consider ourselves to be better at adapting to different cultural situations
Sure.
where we are. And this is not necessarily just dealing with other cultures from other countries, but this is highly important in DEI measures as well,
Okay.
right? So that can be integrating people from different backgrounds and helping to foster that sense of inclusion and
Mm-hmm.
belonging in many organizations. And so this, I use that to help raise awareness, just as a starting point, to help figure out what people's goals are and where they're working towards. Other assessments to build cultural awareness of some of those different things, like direct versus indirect communication,
Okay.
senses of authority. All of these, again, they're not measures meant to say, okay, to categorize, okay, this is where you
Mm-hmm.
are, but to give a starting point. Because again, when you talk about culture, it can be pretty sometimes difficult to nail down, even
Right.
when I get that discussion of like, okay, well, it's the way people do things around here. It's that awareness. Okay, well, it can include a lot of things, a
Yeah.
lot of different measures, and gives something measurable, and gives a point. Okay, well, I want to get here. All
Mm-hmm.
right, so here are some ways that let's talk about some ways to get from there to here, to being
Right.
more open to their ideas, right?
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
mhm.
So, John, I know you just mentioned some of the assessments that you use and kind of like the rationale behind and what they help the individual achieve. Um, but to anyone that might be listening to this podcast that's, just they're at home right now listening, is there anything that they can do, as soon as they listen to this episode that could help them with understanding their own culture or just improving their cultural awareness like on their own? Is there anything that you'd recommend someone doing?
Yeah, there are a number of things that I can think of. I think for a starting point, the best thing to do is to just start exploring things that are like anything when you're trying to improve. Explore things that are outside of your comfort zone
Okay.
to help and to reflect on that.
Yeah.
So simple exercises such as, and a lot of it may depend on where you are and what
Mhm.
access you have to other cultures. But of course, thanks to the internet, we all have access to a lot of different resources, whether it's different types of music or different types of media,
Right.
books, things that even for example, hey, why don't I try some other cuisine that I
Yeah.
haven't done before, and really, of course, you can go there to enjoy it, but just kind of reflect. Okay, so what is it, that if you try it, what is it that I like about it? Or if it turns out it's not something you like, okay, what is it that's different about it?
Right.
What is it? And I think that it's really just a starting point to build some awareness. And one thing that I actually suggest, and this is there are some variations on this. I don't have the names of the authors in front of me right now, but there's something called the D. Well, it's a DAE
Okay.
method, which is to describe, analyze, and evaluate.
Okay.
And this is something that we can use really for any situation, but it was
Yeah.
something that was created by some intercultural pioneers to it's basically a way of getting yourself to avoid jumping to conclusions to something like based on your feelings about
Mhm.
a situation, and really taking the time to analyze it and just consider, okay, well, what's going on here. So the idea with the describe part is when you see a situation, and it could be a situation at work, whatever, what do you see happening
Okay.
without any judgment? So if you see, two people talking, it may just be, okay, the two people talking, and not trying to put any kind of interpretation on it. Oh, it's two friends talking. Well, how do you know they're
Right.
two friends? right? Or they're arguing about something. Well, how do you know they're arguing about something? Is that what you're actually seeing, or is that an interpretation?
Right.
So just physically doing just what you can actually see with your eyes without any kind of interpretation on it.
Okay.
Analyze could be to start thinking about, okay, what are some possible explanations, and going for more than one.
Okay.
What are two or three possible explanations for it? So okay, so maybe they're two friends who are talking, arguing about I don't know, arguing about relationship issues, or maybe their parents arguing about having, how to raise the children or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about those different interpretations about what could be happening there. Then the final part is to evaluate, is once you've come up with some possible explanations, well, how do you feel about them? Okay, and that's the part where the judgment part would come in.
Yeah.
And I think this takes some practice, because of course it's quite natural for us to judge situations.
Right.
And that's by human nature, right?
Yeah.
We tend to evaluate, we get cut off in traffic. Oh, that person's, that person's, I'm not sure how much, what kind of language I can use here. Right? You can use your imagination
Yeah.
about what you say about a person there.
Right.
Whereas and this is the thing, that we judge others by their actions. We judge ourselves by our intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's similarly, in that way, because we have more information about ourselves. Okay, well, if you were the person who cut off someone else, it was like, well, okay, I have a very important meeting I have to get to,
right.
or I have to get to the hospital because there's somebody there. But the other person, they cut us off, it's because they're whatever.
Right.
Like, right. And the point is, it's a bit of a digression, but the point is we want to start thinking about, okay, well, why did that person cut me off?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than coming to it's because they're a horrible person. Maybe they're rushing home. Maybe they're distracted. Just as the same thing as we would judge ourselves by our intentions. And it's a similar idea.
Right.
When you encounter situations that are unfamiliar to you, okay, why is this person not making eye contact with me? Is it because they're disrespectful? Is it because they're embarrassed? Is it because maybe they the way they're doing it might be a way of avoiding disrespecting me by looking at me in the eye?
Yeah.
And I would say that's a way to build that awareness.
Okay.
And then going out and finding out about other cultures as well, that cultures that you might be interested in, or maybe ones that you haven't really explored so much. With doing a bit of learning, surfing the internet, watching popular entertainment from different cultures, all of these things, along with that awareness. And then you can employ that into your that process, the DAE process, into your thinking as well, when you analyze these, experience these different forms of media or food or things like that. I think that's something, a way to start.
Definitely.
On your own. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And John, I have to ask, I'm curious, have you heard the term fundamental attribution error?
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So it's exactly what you explained, pretty much. It's a social psychological principle where essentially we attribute other people's behaviors just without kind of knowing the full scope of the situation or the environment. So kind of like you said, in the situation where if I cut someone off, my gosh, I have to get to the store before they close to get, food for my child at home or something. But if someone cuts me off, then they're, a jerk, and they're just, they only care about themselves, or they're not, a careful driver or something. So that's essentially what it is. Just like you said, we're giving ourselves kind of the benefit of the doubt, but we don't for others.
Well, thank you for giving me that term. Now I have
Yeah.
something that's a little more more succinct to say, instead of giving this long-winded explanation. I love it.
Yeah, of course. That was so I did my undergrad degree in psychology, and I specialize in social psychology, and that's always like just whether it was in college or afterwards, I'd always get that question and, job interviews or just connecting with people that's like, what was the most important thing that you learned with a psych degree, or what's something really fascinating you learned? And that's usually where I like to go with it, because I think it's like when I learned about that, it really changed my own perspective and my own awareness, in the sense of like, maybe in the past I go out to dinner and the waiter, waitress, um, maybe is doesn't seem super pleasant when they're interacting with me. And I'm like, oh wow, like they're grumpy, they're mean, they don't care about my service or anything. I'm gonna, give them a bad tip or something, or whatever the case might be. But really, it kind of was like, well, now I know I might need to step back and say like, well, maybe, they're going through something really tough right now, and it's hard for them to be happy and to smile and, to fake that, interaction. So they're just going through it. So it's really just, it made me be more empathetic to the fact that like we truly don't know what other people are going through. So just kind of be kind and, be welcoming and be warm when we can, and a smile, something as simple as that, or a how are you, can go a long way.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm curious, how easy do you find it is to actually do that, to maintain that in different situations?
Yeah, I think it's something that it's kind of like, I guess the way that I like to look at it is like going to the gym, right? Like if you want to work on growing your bicep, you're going to do like bicep curls and stuff like that, and you have to kind of maintain those exercises to grow that muscle and to keep it strong. I kind of think that this is similar in the aspect that of like you kind of have to regulate yourself and get yourself to start thinking that way and giving others the benefit of the doubt. And I think that initially it's very easy to kind of shy away from that, or maybe you're doing a pretty good job, but then you are, trying to get to work in the morning and someone cuts you off, and, you let out some expletives and want to flip them off, but, you jump to that conclusion, and then you have to kind of step back and say like, oh, okay, like, maybe something else is going on. And sure, the other side of the coin is maybe nothing is going on and they're living the best life that they could have imagined, and they're just not considerate of other people. Sure, that's a possibility, but I think just having that empathetic scope and really just training yourself to view life in that way, I think it can be beneficial. And I think what's helped me kind of maintain that and regulate it is going back to probably something that we've all heard, in our life. It's the golden rule of treat others the way that you want to be treated. And I think it goes into the idea that like I want other people to be empathetic towards me. And, if I meet a stranger, I want them to be able to, give me the benefit of the doubt in a situation if I, maybe act out of character or something. So I just want to make sure that I can do the same for others as well.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And interesting point when you mentioned the golden rule, and I
Yeah.
do, I think I agree with you in the sense of having that empathy for
Hmm.
others. But I would say on top of that,
Yeah.
the one challenge, the one thing about the golden rule, and this can be a problem when it comes to other cultures, is of course, if you follow the principle, okay, yes, we want to treat people with empathy, or we want to treat
Hmm.
people with respect, very very valuable. But then
Right.
understanding, okay, well, what does that mean in
Hmm.
different cultures,
Yeah.
right? And that's where, because if you simplify it, where you say, okay, well, treat others the way you want to be treated, then you could potentially actually really upset somebody, because
Sure.
it's just because, and again, so I think that there's the platinum rule, which goes on top of that, is to treat others with respect, and to
Mm.
have some understanding about, okay, well, what does that mean
Yeah.
in different situations? If you compliment, again, maybe complimenting somebody in front of a group of people, depending on their culture. If you bring up somebody in a work situation, and give praise to a particular individual, oh, this person did a great job. It would work great with someone born and raised in Canada, but again, someone who was in Japan, that
Hmm.
could actually produce the opposite effect, because then you're
Right.
singling them out, where it's more of a concern about having group efforts or things like that. So having that,
Right.
but yes, following, as you said, following that principle of being empathetic,
Yeah.
and understanding how people feel, and considering, okay, well, how would that make me feel?
Hmm.
Good is a good baseline to go from. And I like the idea, the analogy that you say about, using it as a muscle, like
Yeah.
it's training,
Yeah.
and being
Exactly.
forgiving, to yourself when you do, when you have that lapse,
Yeah.
is very important. And just like as it is with anything in our lives, sometimes you're going to fail, and that's
Hmm.
that's natural, right?
Yeah,
The road to success is paved with failures, and as long as you recognize it and you can learn from it, then that's the important thing.
definitely.
So,
Yeah,
mhm.
I agree. And John, this is a perfect example of why I love these conversations on the podcast and why I want to highlight these conversations. Is just full transparency and honesty. What your kind of caveat to the golden rule, I haven't thought of that. That isn't something that popped into my head, and that's not something I registered of, like, treat others the way that you want to be treated, but what does that actually mean? And like, in what ways are we doing that? And maybe that's cultural bias on my end. Just being in the US, we hear that. I had that, rule pounded in my head from kindergarten onwards, and just thinking, okay, like, obviously that means this, but like you said, to a different culture or to a different individual or someone with a different background, that can mean something else, or there's different ways to interpret it. So I think that that's, a perfect example. I'm not going to say, like, I don't mean this in a negative way, that like you called me out, but I appreciate you being able to say, like, well, I think that's good, but like, what about like this angle of it? I think that that's really beneficial, and that's where, like, I'm just excited now because I'm like, well, look, that one moment that you had with me has kind of opened my own self-awareness to the way that I'm saying things or beliefs that I'm holding. Where else can I dive deeper into who I am and just improve that awareness in other aspects? So I really appreciate you bringing that up, and I think that's a tremendous point that you made. So just bravo to you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you. I appreciate that. And again, as you said, this is the benefit of being able to talk with people from so
yeah,
many different backgrounds. And of course, you did mention earlier at the beginning that I do a podcast,
yeah.
which I've called, titled Intercultural Insiders, which I do as an audio podcast and actually also as a live streaming show on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube. On the My business name is Hiyaku Coaching, which is a little tricky, but HIYA. Sorry, now HIYAKU. Sorry, because it comes from Japanese, so I'm not always used to thinking about how to
Sure.
spell it in English. So, and also, since I've mentioned it comes from Japanese, it's hiyaku is a word um, which is about making a giant, steps forward, like
Okay.
great stride forward, which can also, mean in the literal sense or also in terms of making progress.
Okay.
So getting back to the podcast, Intercultural Insiders, is
Yeah.
it's an opportunity for me to talk with people who have experiences with other cultures, whether they
Yeah.
are newcomers to Canada. I've had a couple of conversations with them, or also actually I had a two-parter with a woman who is from Japan, who's based in
Mm,
the United States, based in the Midwest,
okay.
talking about her own adaptation to American culture, and also she also helps Japanese who are coming to work in the Midwest to adapt there with their families there,
Mm,
uh, and it's an opportunity to just hear about different experiences and their different takes.
yeah.
Because even though again this is what I'm focusing on, helping people to adapt to different cultures, I can always learn from
Yeah.
people's experiences
Exactly.
and it's sharing what's out there because my intention is with people who listen to it is to that they're going to learn something from it and if they're in similar situations, whether they are new to Canada or the US and they're feeling isolated, or any someone who's adapting to any culture. It doesn't necessarily have to be Canada or the United States. Just to be aware that they're not alone, and it's like, oh
Yeah.
hey, that person, they had that, and look where they are now, and this is how they did that. And yeah, okay, so it's not just me. It's
Mhm.
feeling out there, as we all have those points in time
Mhm.
where we feel isolated in some way and feeling like we're all alone, and just having that voice out there, just being able to hear from different voices, I think can be really in and of itself just a great boost for
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
I love that.
So
I think that that's, that's awesome, and I think that that's something that I hold very dear to me with my podcast of just like, I want to talk to people about their passions and their life and their mindset, and I grew from every conversation that I have personally, but I want anyone listening to be able to hear it and say to themselves like, yeah, I'm going through that too, or I feel that way, or I want to pursue that, or I felt lost after college, or I didn't go to college, and I had to figure out what to do, and just how to navigate through life. I think that that's the cool part about, like, at the end of the day, as a human being, I think we all just want to feel seen and heard and included, and like there's others that understand what we're going through, and hearing other people's experiences, whether it's through my podcast or your podcast or just having these conversations. I think you're just, without even maybe knowing it or realizing it, you're kind of forming a community, and you're finding similar situations, and it makes you feel a little, less alone in a world that's massive.
Absolutely. And I love what you're doing, with the whole premise that you have for your podcast of just talking to people with passion about different things, because
Yeah.
then it's such, because you'll I'm sure you're encountering people that you with passions about things that maybe you never had even considered or heard
Right.
about.
Right.
And I'm sure that your listeners also get the same way, so that they, maybe if they have something that they might consider a passion about, something that perhaps they might feel a little uncomfortable talking about it
Hmm.
with other people, because maybe it's a bit, seems a bit unusual to the, they might think, oh well, people might think I'm weird, or
Right.
something, but then they can hear all of these different, well, okay, they've got a person who's talking about intercultural things, or someone who's obsessed with connections. Richard
Yeah.
Lee Tai, who's the one who connected us together, by the
Yep.
way, as well. There's such a variety out there, and I love that, and it really, just what's connecting it. It's passion. It's the
Yeah.
passion for that, and if you have passion for something, and you're dedicated, you can make something out of that.
Yeah.
A career of some kind, because as long as you can connect that with what people need, then it's a great way to live,
Yeah.
and to embrace those passions, as opposed to having to put them aside, um, because of maybe what might expect the societal norms might be,
Right.
or what have you. So yeah,
Yeah.
good on you. Good
Well,
on you
thank you so
for
much.
doing this.
Yeah, I really appreciate the kind words, and I mean, honestly, with everything you just said, I might need you to come host my podcast sometime because you definitely have the premise down. But no, like I really appreciate the kind words, and definitely huge shout out to Richard for connecting us. That's his passion, like John said,
Yeah.
connecting. So that's, and just to talk about that real quick, I think that, like, if I'm having a regular conversation with someone, and hypothetically, let's say I'm Richard or something, and I'm like, oh, I'm passionate about connecting. As a random person, like, on the street that you might meet, I might be like, what the heck does that mean? Like, you're
Hmm.
passionate about connecting. Connecting what? So I think it's cool that, like, like John was saying, there's just so many different things out there. And, I grew up in a time where, you go to school growing up in high school and stuff, and it's like, you're in sports, and like that's like the cool things to be in, and everyone loves that and everyone wants to be a part of it, but anything else is like weird or not as cool, or it's not as accepted or anything, like whether that's you know video games or breakdancing or cooking or science olympiad, anything like that. It's just like, that's not the cool thing, that's not the in thing, but that's just dumb, to be honest. I mean, it's just, it's just dumb thinking. And I think, you know, the newer generations are more just accepting and trying new things, which I love to see. But, I think that's the biggest encouragement that I want to encourage anyone listening to this, that kind of John was touching on. It's like, whatever you're passionate about, even if you think it might be a little unusual or people might not understand it, I guarantee that there's so many people out there. There's such a community for it. You just might not be exposed to it yet, or in your town there might not be other yo-yo enthusiasts. But like if you, look it up on Facebook or YouTube or something, you'll see that there's a lot of other people that share those passions. And like John was saying, those passions, that's just really the driving force that can, transform your life if you pursue them.
Yes, absolutely. And that I completely agree with you, as someone who also grew up in a generation, Generation X.
Hmm.
where it was, yeah, it was about pretty much about sports, and any being interested in anything nerdy, like you said, did not fly.
Right.
Very different now. It's very different now, and I think that as many problems as there are with the internet and social media, the fact that it enables people to connect together
Yeah.
in that way, is incredible. It's amazing, and I think also that also helps again, you know, with adapting to other cultures as well,
Yeah.
because again you can find more ways to learn more about other cultures. Once for example, if you know that you're going to be going on assignment somewhere,
Yeah.
then you can do some exploration there. And
Right.
and again, of course, it does require some. In my my feeling is that it does require some deep reflection with that as well. Which is again, I think if you can work with a coach in some way, that can
Right.
really help you to reflect on things in a way that you might not have considered before, and to do it before, and also to do it when you are there, when you're going through those tough times, because you're going to have that, as we do, we go through, as talked about, when you're going to another culture, there's a honeymoon phase, and then you
Hmm.
go through that depression, and it used to be thought that, okay, you just go through it once and then you're done and then you're fine on the other side, and I think there's a greater understanding that's a bit more complex than that, and you
Yeah.
can go through waves, just like it can with any kind of situation, depending on that. So having that opportunity to reflect
Yeah.
and to consider, and when you have specific goals in mind, that you want to adapt and be more effective in a situation, then that helps to make the process easier.
Hmm.
Not completely easy, not pain free, but
Right.
easier, I would say. And I think that had I known that when I was in Japan, then I think that my time adapting there would have been easier. And it is possible, I think, to adapt without coaching,
Yeah.
but it's, if you have that resource, it can make life much easier, and you can,
100%.
get through all the pain a little more quickly, and be more open to opportunities by working with a coach, or
Yeah.
doing a lot of that deep reflection.
Definitely. And maybe it's a product of, generational upbringing and such. But I think like for for my generation and probably generations before mine, there's a bit of a mentality of like, I don't need help. I can do it all on my own. I'll figure it all on my own. I'm definitely one of those people who, for the longest time, I was like, I don't want help. I don't need, someone's support, or I don't need this or that. When there's nothing wrong with, investing in a coach, or whether it's even, seeking therapy or talking to a counselor, or a life coach or an academic advisor, whatever it is. I think like, there's not that we don't have to do everything on our own. We can rely on help, and if anything, kind of like John was saying, it's just going to make the process smoother. And it's going like, these are professionals that they're meant to help you during these kind of navigational periods. So I definitely encourage anyone, just don't be afraid to seek out that assistance from someone who, this is their career, this is their passion. It can really, expedite the process for you and just help you stay accountable, and also just see different perspectives that you might not be able to see on your own.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's the development in attitudes
Hmm.
towards mental health and balance in life is a very positive thing
Yeah.
that I've seen, with younger generations, that didn't really exist when we, well, at least when I was, maybe both of us were growing up,
Right.
but yeah, and that attitude, where people are more open to talk about the challenges that they're facing, and that creates an opportunity as well, because then you have more opportunities to speak openly about these things,
Hmm.
and find other people,
Right.
who are going through similar experiences, and that you can share, and
Definitely.
and not feel ashamed, and that's just a positive. That's just a wonderful thing, a
Yeah,
wonderful thing. Hmm.
I completely agree. And on the topic of coaching and, working with a coach, John, are you currently available to work with new clients who may need some kind of coaching in terms of intercultural different things going on?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I'm open to working with clients one to one, and also in group situations.
Okay.
I've done a number of workshops for some organizations based here in Toronto and Canada,
Okay.
working with newcomer entrepreneurs, for example. I work with well, for those of you who are located here, I'm doing some upcoming work for there's a group called Brilliant Minds Group,
Okay.
BMG for short, which is based in the Toronto, Ontario area, which
Okay.
is focused on helping newcomers and international students adapt to life here. There's a very significant population of
Mm-hmm.
international students, particularly from China and India,
Okay.
based around in the Toronto area, and it's dedicated. This organization, Brilliant Minds Group, is dedicated to um, helping them adapt to life in Canada
Fantastic.
beyond just finding, say, because many people, a lot of the focus is on finding a job, for example,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
obviously, you need to, there's a pyramid
Right.
of a hierarchy of needs that, you need
Mm-hmm.
to be able to find clothing and shelter, and of course, and
Right.
pay for that. But in the long term, there's also that sense of belonging, and being able
Mm-hmm.
to communicate with other people, which is going to sustain you in the long term and your
Right.
mental health,
Right.
as we've talked about. And so I do workshops through them, but I also work directly with clients,
Okay.
and I am working on I have something in the works
Okay.
about a course, an online course, which I don't want to say too much about it right now because it's still in the works, but
Sure.
I have plans to release more about that.
Okay.
Depending on when this is released, it may actually be available, and I'll certainly update you on that.
Okay.
But yeah, so anyone who wants to reach out to me, there's a number of ways. I have the Hiyaku coaching website, which is thriveglobally.ca. So thrive globally as one word
Okay.
.ca. That's one way to reach me. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, John Edward McGraw, which is also where you can see the live show that I'm in, the live stream Intercultural
Yep.
Insiders. And that is also available on the Hiyaku Coaching YouTube channel,
Okay.
which is, of course, one word, Hiyaku Coaching. And again, that's HIYAKU
Okay.
coaching. So those are some different ways to see what I'm doing, and also to reach out to me,
Perfect.
and I'm open to having a free consultation to start off with. I like to call it a discovery call, just to see again if we would be a good fit, because not
Mm-hmm.
everybody is necessarily, may not necessarily like me. For all I know, I may not like you, but I mean, I like to consider myself a pretty easygoing guy to get along with. But
Yeah.
just you want to find someone who you can, if you're going to be coaching with them, that you feel comfortable with, and you have
Sure.
that
Yep.
sense of trust. So that helps to establish that sense of trust between myself and prospective client.
Okay.
So you can schedule through the website, and we can communicate and see what we can do, and if it would be a good fit to work together. So again, feel
Excellent.
free to reach out to me those ways. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I will also go ahead and I will put everything that John just went over in the description of this episode. So his website, his LinkedIn, YouTube channel, all that good stuff. So if you didn't catch him saying it, it'll be in the description of this episode. So just go down there and check it out. And whether you want to just get in contact with John and say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, or I really like that you had this perspective, definitely reach out to him that way. Or if you are interested in seeing if you might be able to work together in a coaching capacity, definitely you can contact John that way and check out his live streams, whether it's on LinkedIn or on the YouTube channel. Definitely join the conversation and share perspective too if you have any. I think that John's a fantastic person to not only learn from but to engage with and to just to collaborate with and share kind of your thoughts and experiences. So I definitely want to encourage anyone that if something really resonated with you in this podcast, please do definitely reach out to John, because I think he's a fantastic person that's doing some really awesome stuff. So definitely keep an eye out for the things that he has in the works as well.
Well, thank you so much. It's
Yeah,
been a real pleasure to be on here, Zach. You're a fantastic host,
thank you.
and I've gotten so much from just having the conversation with you. And yeah, really would love to continue the conversation another time as well, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and just to share your experiences and stories and passions a little bit. John, to anyone that's listening back home, do you have any final thoughts or messages that you want to leave the listeners with?
I would just say, if you feel like you're lost or alone, just as Zach also said earlier, don't be afraid to reach out for help, whether it's for someone like me who would help you with cultural aspects, or therapy, or anything else. Yeah, just reach out to somebody. There's
Yeah,
no reason to feel alone. You can do that, and you can eventually find your way, even if it feels like it's lost. You can find a way to get through it on the other side.
definitely. I think that's a fantastic point. To anyone listening, you're not alone. There's people that believe in you. There's resources out there. There's people that want to help and want to see you happy and successful and doing the things that you love. So don't be afraid to reach out. So thank you, John, again for your time and for everything that you shared. As you said, I definitely want to continue the conversation, and I'm excited to see what you do and to continue to support you in any way that I can. But I'm sure this will be the first of many conversations, and I'm looking forward to them all.
Same here. Same here, Zach.
Awesome. Well, have a good night, John. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. See you later.
Bye.